approval of the March 3rd council meeting minutes. And since we don't quite yet have everybody here, I probably need Secretary Laird, if you would do the honors of doing a motion, that would be great since you were here.
I move we approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
And I call the question.
The question has been called. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. All right, moving right along to item 3. I guess I'll turning it over to Mike. Are you handling this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good to see you all, and so many smiling faces out here in the gallery. That's true. That's true. It's still in your hands. That's for sure. The High-Speed Rail Authority has funded the Strategic Growth Council to create a position to work with local governments to optimize the potential benefits accruing from high-speed rail to local communities, not just in station stop cities, but surrounding station stop cities who might achieve economic benefit and other benefits in planning. And so High-Speed Rail has funded a planning advisory position. To fill this position, we're very pleased to have hired Suzanne Haig to serve as the Senior Advisor for Community and Development and Planning for the Strategic Growth Council. Suzanne is an urban designer planner with expertise in community revitalization, housing, and real estate development. She's consulted nationally on complex, high-profile planning development projects, including the post-Katrina New Orleans rehabilitation projects. Most recently, she's been with the Environmental Protection Agency, serving as their on-the-ground coordinator in the Strong Cities, Strong Communities program in the San Joaquin Valley, and in particular working out of Mayor Swearingen's office in Fresno to coordinate federal and local activities there. So I'd like Suzanne to come up and say a few words and introduce herself.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's wonderful to see many of you again, and great to meet those of you who I haven't met yet. I look forward to further collaboration. This position really feels like a great natural extension of the work that I've been doing on the ground in Fresno. The Strategic Growth Council has been a great partner to that work. We've been focused with this White House initiative, Strong Cities, Strong Communities, on supporting the city at the local level and doing infill development, land use planning for more sustainable economic development and growth outcomes. And it's been a real pleasure to work with those of you at the state level that have been supporting this work. So I'm really looking forward to bringing some of those lessons to bear, especially looking at the high-speed rail project. I mean, I think from my perspective, my humble opinion, high-speed rail is really the most exciting planning project in the country. It's ambitious, it's forward-thinking, and it's really necessary. I mean, local communities stand to bear great air quality mitigation. They stand to, benefit tremendously from economic development opportunities, connecting the state in a faster and more efficient way. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, for myself and for all of us, really, to help support the project in supporting local communities to do more sustainable land use planning, to do advanced planning around development and economic development opportunities. I'm really interested to know from your respective agencies how the Strategic Growth Council and High-Speed Rail can help each of you to better fulfill your missions. I think there's a lot of areas of overlap, and I'm really excited to work with you all. And again, really thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
The High-Speed Rail Authority has also funded another position for the Strategic Growth Council, and that is a Regional Advanced Mitigation Coordinator. The program will seek to form partnerships to do large-scale, long-term, biologically significant mitigation resulting from large-scale infrastructure projects across all of your agencies in the state of California. To fill this position, the SGC is pleased to have hired Dr. Dennis Grossman to serve as the Senior Advisor for Environmental Science and Policy. Denny, for 12 years, was the Chief Ecologist of the Nature Conservancy nationally, and his primary endeavors included advancing conservation planning methods at the national and international scale. He was Vice President for Science at NatureServe for 7 years. NatureServe is the science and technology spin-off from the Nature Conservancy that seeks to bring information technology to bear on decision processes. And then over the past few years, Denny's been working closely with international finance institutions on large-scale infrastructure projects around the world. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Denny Grossman.
Good afternoon. It's nice to see many of you that I know and many of you that I hope to get to know better in the near future. I'm also extremely grateful for this opportunity to be here. For those of you who are not familiar with the acronym RAMP, it's Regional Advanced Mitigation Planning, and it really represents what I think is required to do planning anywhere intelligently and to actually live in places in the future that we can envision that we want to live in. So my career has been with the conservation community. I spent around 30 years as a conservation planner, and over the years I've learned that just having the right information and the right tools is not enough to do good planning. It's putting them in the hands of the right people. So more and more I've gravitated towards working with people who are doing landscape level planning, be they corporations or international development banks. And I've recognized that there's a couple things that's always missing. Number one, we're expecting corporations and financial institutions to actually have the broad view of the public's interests and stakeholder interests. And I don't think that's a fair expectation in many cases. It needs to come down to the public agencies that can envision the future and figure out what needs to happen and have the policies in place to make it happen. The advanced component of it to me is really important for people to be able to look into the future rather than the situation right now and try to figure out what the implications of today's decisions will be on the future and incorporate those in decision making. To look at cumulative effects of conservation and development decisions and to put all of those together. So when I heard about this position in California, to actually be able to have a considerable role in terms of managing a process to implement all these things that we so desperately need, and we need really good examples in California, in the U.S., and more broadly, I was very excited to take it. So similarly to Suzanne, I would say that I feel like everything I've done up to this point in time has prepared me for this and has allowed me to recognize the importance of the situation, and I just hope that it's prepared me enough to do it well. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you.
So I just want to thank the High-Speed Rail Authority for recognizing the connection between both mitigation and planning and their overall project. We had really exceptional applicants for both positions and are extremely pleased to have our two top picks accept the positions and be here to work on this project.
Ken, if I may, just I was so struck by the talent and excitement of these two positions, and reflected on the evolution of the work of this council and the leadership, Mike, that you have provided, the vision and the commitment that puts us in this position to first reach out for the funds and to offer to partner with the High-Speed Rail Authority, and then to be in the position to recruit the kind of talent that we have is a real testament to the progress that the council has made. And I just wanted to acknowledge that in a point of parochial pride. I'm from the Central Valley, so I couldn't be more excited about the continuing work on this important high-speed rail project. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Secretary Dooley. I want to turn now to the executive report, if that's okay, Ken. The Secretary Laird has suggested that the executive report might really be better titled the headline news. And the executive report is what's in your packet, and what I'm going to talk about now is the headline news. Most of our work, is really ongoing work, and much of it on any given at any given meeting time is not in a conclusive state. And so that's what you'll read about in the executive report within your packet. Some things that are at interesting turning points, some things that are at conclusive states are on today's agenda, certainly the granting program and the infill development report. And there are a few others that I'd like to call your attention to in the headline news. The first is the Sustainable Communities Implementation Program, program that was articulated in the governor's budget proposal for cap and trade expenditures. It envisioned the Strategic Growth Council managing $100 million to actually develop with partners on-the-ground projects that collectively targeted the expertise of multiple agencies on the council in bringing funding and technical advice to local government implementation. We've done a great job of supporting planning around the state of California. Now it's time to start supporting the actual implementation of those plans, and we're very pleased to see that in the governor's budget. There are now 3 proposals regarding the Strategic Growth Council's role in funding these activities. Those are in conference at this time, and we await the outcome. Under the heading of Senate Bill 375 implementation, one of our ongoing responsibilities, we know that urban design can affect the health of the residents of urban areas. And we want to find ways to express that in planning scenarios. And the council some time ago voted to fund the development of a scenario tool, Urban Footprint, which connects the co-benefits of various urban design parameters, including the co-benefits associated with a more active lifestyle that can result from better urban design. The Urban Footprint, the SGC staff, with extensive involvement with Health and Human Services staff, has reached out to the 3 MPOs, 3 of the 4 largest MPOs in the state of California are using the Urban Footprint model. They represent more than 50% of California's population. So your model is reaching a very wide audience of impact. But the model is version 1.0, and we all know version 1.0 leads to version 1.2, 2.0. There are improvements that can be made, and the department, with the help of the Department of Health and Human Services and other agencies of state and various other institutions, we've assembled a technical advisory committee to look at improving the data and the management of that data within the model to better connect the relationship of health and urban design. The technical advisory committee that's been assembled is really, I think, an all-star crew. It involves people from all over the United States, including the United States Center for Disease Control. and our own public health department here in the state of California, as well as researchers at various universities. This group has now concluded that the proposal to revamp this part of the model through an actual hands-on implementation of a concept at SACOG is approved and moving forward. And we hope to have results on this in July. We'll bring those back to you and keep you informed. But we continue to have very high hopes that this model can help communities and particularly public elected officials better understand what it is that happens on Tuesday night when they approve a project. And then finally, we have talked about infrastructure planning and California's planning priorities on a couple of occasions. We're at an important point. The Department of Finance has asked us to prepare a very brief statement to go out with their fall budget letter, reminding participants that they need to document their use of California's planning priorities to inform their infrastructure budget requests. We're certainly not asking anything new in this paragraph that Department of Finance would like to circulate. It replaces a much shorter statement that's been in previous years' letters, but this will be a little bit more emphatic in asking that departments and agencies point us towards that guidance that they already use, and we know they do, but simply to point us to that and make it a matter of the 5-year infrastructure plan public record that these things are being done by our departments and agencies, and we're really looking forward to turning that corner and working with the Department of Finance and others on that. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to have any questions.
Questions or comments? James.
Mike, in your report, you give us an update about the MPO self-assessment and that you're going to be releasing something this summer. I know we talked about the report quite a bit at the last meeting, and I was wondering if you just give us an update on the process since then and what's envisioned for the summer, because I know we may not be able to see the report as a group before you send it out. So I just wonder what the process was going to be.
Well, we certainly, I think Secretary Rodriguez made some very good points at our last meeting regarding the necessity to have a broader audience comment on the process of developing SCS, Sustainable Community Strategies. We certainly don't want to invite comment on any particular sustainable community strategy authored by any particular institution, but the process itself is worthy of consideration, and that is what we set out to do when we asked the MPOs about their relationship to the state in crafting these plans. But Secretary Rodriguez said, that's a good start, but what about the state itself commenting and your departments and agencies commenting on your relationship to that planning activity? And so we do plan to reach out to the departments and agencies of the Strategic Growth Council to seek input on that. And we feel that we can do that since it's certainly not a closed process of any kind. We'll be asking for comments. Those comments will be public comments. And we also hope to reach out to a broader community of participants, stakeholder participants around the state, to get their views on this as well.
Thank you very much.
John?
No, getting ready for council comments.
Okay, he's ready for the next item.
Yeah.
We don't want to hold him back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Just as a reminder, if folks have comments on any item or generally, if you would please fill out a card in the back and bring it up to Adrian in the front, we'd appreciate that. Otherwise, we're moving to item number 5 and council communications and updates. And since Secretary Laird is chomping at the bit, we'll let him go first.
Well, I don't know if that's it exactly, but I wanted to, maybe as part of the report.
On a bipartisan immigration plan. This is someone who is now trying to sort of get close to the big conservative magnate in the hopes that some of that magnetism will rub off.
That's the former
on him.
governor of
Marco Rubio
Montana,
wanted
and
to
we're
go to
talking about
Iowa.
the Iowa primary. I have no idea what relevance that is. And well, the trouble is with the public meetings I'm usually in, that will lead to 50 comments. We're going to be in trouble. Yeah, exactly. And if you've seen the ad of Jody Ernst on castrating cows, it's the reason she's gone to #1 in the primary and will probably win it today. So a real message for candidates and how to market their stuff. The thing, I wanted to do a few quick things, but one is that I wanted to also welcome Suzanne and Denny, but comment that we are lucky to have Denny here, and I think one of the stumbling blocks that has existed in the RAMP program is there are contributions from various of our agencies, and I know Secretary Kelly and transportation and myself and water are two of the biggest ones, and one of the stumbling blocks is that we're trying to meld this all together, but I think without adequate leadership, it's tough for the water people to get past water, or the transportation people to get past transportation, and I think that's the benefit of him being there, and it's going to require some work by us and others with our agencies to make sure we can make RAMP as a unified thing work, and so that's why I'm really glad you're here, and I know I stand ready to do that part, but that is the challenge, and I think that's the challenge as we seek to move it in other places in the state as well. And I also, in the executive director's report, there was a mention of the fact that the cap and trade money is in conference in the budget negotiations, that there are different plans, and we're waiting to see how it turns out, and we certainly are. But there is, if you look at the governor's proposal, which I hope in some form will be what prevails, many of the things that would come here, it is a long-term appropriation. It is a multi-year appropriation, and so there is time to decide what to do. But the piece that might be ag land conservation, I don't think can wait for that process, because we are dealing with, as I keep saying, the Williamson Act hanging by a thread, some counties deciding that they're on the verge of formally pulling out, us having to have a decision about what comes next, and to use that as some piece of the bridge to it. And so it's my hope, if that holds, that we will do that sooner rather than later. And to my council members, if anybody has an interest in ag land preservation, I have been meeting with relevant agencies and stakeholders and other people, just trying to take temperatures of where people are. So if people on the council have strong opinions, I would love to hear them, to make sure that we factor it in. And then I just wanted to mention a few updates as the agency that deals with fire and water. Obviously, that we just have officially in the last week the latest confirmation of the Sierra snowpack measurement, and right now we are at 3% of normal. In the southern Sierra, we are at 0%. And so while the governor's declared a state of emergency and different things are happening, it's caused a real focus in a way that a lot of the issues of this council are being raised, and where we've been trying to get people to talk about a more efficient use of water and how you do it, it has moved to the front page. Whether it's groundwater management, recycling, and what's going on today with the water board and that, and different things. So I think it's the opportunity for everybody to weigh in. And when at our last meeting, I said that we'd adopted the Water Action Plan, and now over $500 million was appropriated in the emergency drought bill, and we're moving ahead and trying to get the integrated water management money out the door or speed it up. So there are lots of issues that relate to this here. And fire, ironically, the Secretary of Interior and I had a major fire awareness press conference in San Diego, telling everybody, quoting the governor from the previous day, saying, "Don't be stupid." And then it was within 7 days that some people were stupid. And in San Diego, we had conditions where basically it was very hot, 3% humidity, winds blowing 25 to 50 miles an hour. Everything that normally happens in October was happening in May. So it's raising all those issues in the context of the urban, non-urban interface and all the things that are Strategic Growth Council issues. And so I think that they are being forced by current events in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And so I think it just really puts pressure on us to do our work, because we'd been doing it in ways where people weren't paying much attention, and yet it is at the heart of the various things that are going on in current events. So, and one last thing, obviously the Delta is a piece of what we're doing, and on Friday we extended the comment period for the EIR by 45 days to match it with a new implementing agreement that was released on Friday. So it will be 45 days from June 13th, which was the previous thing. So whenever that falls near the end of July, and encourage people to make comments. Thank you.
Other council comments, updates? Bob?
Thanks. I just want to report on three different areas: infill, schools, and transportation. Regarding infill finance, we're going to get an update later from Economic and Planning Systems on their recommendations. I met this morning with Secretary Caballero to discuss ways, and with you, James, to discuss ways that the SGC can reduce infill barriers and support development of housing. It was a good discussion. We look forward to more conversations. Working with SGC staff, including Suzanne Haig, to identify opportunities to support infill development in conjunction with existing SGC planning grant awardees. Regarding schools, we had a meeting this morning with Secretary Batcher at the Government Operations Agency, as well as the Office of Public School Construction, to determine if there are opportunities to support changes to encourage school siting in infill locations. Regarding transportation, we initiated conversations between the CTC, the Transportation Commission, and State Transportation Agency. I had a discussion yesterday with Secretary Kelly to identify ways to encourage investments in projects which support infill development. CTC would like to present to the SGC at the September meeting regarding regarding the Regional Transportation Planning Guidelines and the State Transportation Investment Program, and hopefully we'll get that on the agenda, as well as having SGC staff present about our efforts related to SCS implementation and infrastructure at the CTC meeting. So I think it's important that we begin to encourage dialogue between the CTC and the SGC, given the amount of investment that passes through the CTC with regards to transportation and roads. I have just a general question for the council, and that is, as we look forward to the 2016 revision of the Regional Transportation Plan Guidelines, are there topics that member agencies would want to see discussed during these sessions in open meetings? And I don't think we need an answer to that question today, but I'd encourage people to think about the opportunities there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Secretary Rodriguez, we're on item number 5, council communications and updates. I'm checking to see if you have any for us.
Yes.
And we thank you for agreeing to fund the, no.
No, I'd just like to note that Greek yogurt protein bars by Nature Valley are very good, but I don't know that they're a perfect lunch. But you can try them as a snack. No, let me just note that it might be of interest to the council that the Air Resources Board has finalized its approval of the scoping plan for AB 32 implementation. That action was taken in May, and additionally the board, as I recall, certified the EIR that goes along with, or the environmental assessment that goes along with the scoping plan. I think there were some changes directed by the board, and they're going to be made, and it will become final then. So we'll be looking at then continued implementation of AB 32, but we'll be using the scoping plan as a basis for our future actions. So that was the most important thing to have occurred at Cal EPA.
Ken, I have one
James.
other thing. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our new Deputy Secretary for Housing Policy at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, Susan Riggs. Susan, do you mind just standing up and introducing yourself? Maybe, if you don't mind, could Susan just tell everybody what her background is, because it's
Of
very
course.
impressive. Thanks, Susan.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. I've been at the agency for about 3 months now, and I'm very pleased to be here. And really, like the previous introductions, I feel like this is a real evolution of my career. I've been in affordable housing for about 15 years, starting in a public sector role with a local housing authority in San Diego, and then moving into a role with the California Association of Realtors, and then practiced law in the area of affordable housing and redevelopment law at Best Best and Krieger for several years, and ended at a trade association in San Diego, and so I've just relocated up here from San Diego a couple months ago. Sorry to recite my resume, but I wasn't prepared to speak.
You have an impressive background. I wanted the council to know that we're very happy to have you.
Yeah,
join us.
and so I'm looking forward to working with you all. So thank you.
Thank you very much and welcome. So I a couple of things I want to mention. First, under SB 743, the Office of Planning and Research is directed to issue new regulations or draft guidelines on changing how traffic delay is evaluated under CEQA. That ends up sounding kind of boring, but it turns out to be, for those who follow transportation issues, to be an extremely important issue. And we are looking to move from what's called loss of service, which tends to be about traffic delay, to looking to project impacts on the number of vehicle miles traveled within a particular region. And so that changes the emphasis. The old system tended to have a lot of find a lot of impacts for infill development. The new system tends to find more impacts for greenfield development, so that has a fair amount of implications. Our draft guidelines will be out this month, so if this is a topic of interest to you, I encourage you to go to the OPR website. You can sign up for the listserv to get a copy of it, and if you missed that, if you want to just look at the proposed guidelines, they'll be available, as I say, sometime this month. Second, I do want to note on the cap and trade front that it is encouraging that all three proposals that Mike McCoy mentioned include money that would go through the Strategic Growth Council. I mention that in part because up to now, this council has been funded by Prop 84 dollars, and as we're about to find out, we're anticipating spending the end of our Prop 84 dollars today. So there will be no more funding for the Strategic Growth Council if that is not in all likelihood in the cap and trade portion of the budget. So if you support the work of this council, that may be worth keeping in mind and considering. There is a lot of focus. Secretary Laird talked about money potentially for preservation of ag land. The cap and trade dollars conceivably would be used across the spectrum of the agencies represented by this council And that's a lot of agencies with a lot of very big projects, and there's a very substantial amount of interest by local entities, particularly metropolitan planning organizations and those that work on transportation, in ensuring that, given that they've had to implement SB 375, that they have a significant voice in how those dollars are spent. And I just want to say publicly that this council is committed to making sure that there is a significant local voice in any determinations that we'll make if we have the chance to do so. And then finally, I want to mention something that OPR has done in conjunction with the Local Government Commission. We made a proposal on behalf of the governor and the Local Government Commission to the AmeriCorps to fund a very unique program which was approved by AmeriCorps. We got an AmeriCorps grant, and we're trying to augment that a bit. But we are going to send 47 professionals, young professionals, into local communities starting in October to work on climate change related issues identified by the local communities. And those folks will rotate through 6-month stints. They'll go through three rotations. And so right now we are recruiting young professionals and garnering interest from local communities. There's a flyer that we've left in the back if you're interested in it. This is absolutely unique program. It was something that we came up with and AmeriCorps approved, and if it goes well, we expect it may become a national program. So again, if you're interested, take a look at that and help us recruit. I have one public comment from the last item. I want to make sure and give Pat Eklund a chance to talk. It's all yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Pat Eklund, and I'm currently a council member with the City of Novato, former mayor and past president of the League of California Cities. I serve on the ABAG Executive Board, representing the 11 cities to the executive Board. I wanted to encourage Mr. McCoy and this council, when you do the MPO assessment, that you reach out not only to MTC in the Bay Area, but also ABAG. And I would encourage you to do the same in SCAG, San Diego, and ABAG as well. A lot of times both agencies are not looked at. I would encourage you also to not only ask for feedback from the staff, but the board members specifically, and the cities and counties. As representative of 11 cities, I've been holding meetings with elected officials in my county, getting their feedback on what went well and what areas need improvement on the Plan Bay Area. And I'll just give you a little tidbit. We had one page of flip chart on what went well from the 11 cities in Marin, and we had 7 pages of what did not go well. We're in the process of finalizing that list, and we're going to be sending it to the executive board for ABAG to have some discussions. And as a board, we're going to be talking about that so that when we do the update by 2017, we'll hopefully have a reverse analysis. So thank you.
Much appreciated. And I'm sure you take note of that. Okay. So let's move to item 6, which is the round 3 of Prop 84 Urban Greening Grant Program recommendations for funding. Allison, are you Polly? Okay, great. Hi, Polly.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Polly Escovedo. I am the program manager for the Urban Greening Program. And it is a pleasure, this is where the good stuff comes, it's a pleasure to be able to present to you the recommendations. We're looking for approval for 40 proposals. That's 37 projects and 3 plans for a total of $23.9 million. 21 million of that is from a current appropriation. The remainder of that is carryover money from either funds that were not awarded previously or projects that were withdrawn. Before I thank my team, I'm going to go off script here for just a moment, which I sometimes do. I want to talk a little bit about our work ethic in this office. And when I talk about how hard we work, we really have 4 basic principles, 4 basic rules. And one is to work our day to get an A. The other is to make the auditors happy. The third is we never want to be the cause of somebody's dinner conversation. And fourth is we want to keep the Secretary Laird out of the newspaper. So when we think we've done that, we feel like we've had a good day. So I do want to take just a moment to thank the team members who make up this group. We have program staff, we have technical group. There's a considerable amount of time that goes into this process, from the workshops to the proposals, the concepts, reviewing the applications, site visits. It's a long process, but it's one that we're proud of. It gives us the confidence to come before you today, knowing that we're bringing the best. We have a diverse team. We have the program staff, and then we have the technical team. And these groups are made up of the agencies that make up the Strategic Growth Council. So we have the Cal EPA, we have Department of Transportation, we have the Office of Planning and Research, Public Health, and then we have various departments under the Natural Resources Agency, including CAL FIRE, State Parks, and Fish and Wildlife. I am going to take just a moment to call out one of our team members, Mr. Jack Tappel, who's here today. Jack works for the Los Angeles Regional Quality Control Board, and he's one of yours, Secretary Rodriguez, and he has gone above and beyond this cycle. We've really had a focus on water. How do we conserve water? How do we make sure that the projects that we get, we're getting the maximum benefit? And he's just been instrumental in educating us, the team, and educating our applicants out in the field as to how we do that. So I do want to take a moment and thank Jack for his good work. When we were first charged with this, managing this program, we were asked to not do business as usual. We were asked to look for the highest quality of projects. We were asked to get folks to focus on long-term sustainability and climate change. And we were asked to not recommend projects for funding just because there was money on the table. So in other words, we were asked to use this program as an opportunity to affect change. And since this is, as pointed out earlier, our last round of Proposition 84 grant awards, I thought I would take a moment and highlight 5 areas where the group has seen considerable forward progress since we started this program. And the first is the involvement of the health communities. There was a big push early on to include a healthy community statement within the guidelines. Excuse me. And each year we see the number of support letters come through increase. But this year, at least 4 of our proposals are part of the Kaiser Heal Zone, with money coming and being contributed from those programs. So we're just thrilled about that. The next 2 are areas that were near and dear to Mr. Fisher's heart, and these were things that back in 2008, I think we started this process, that he really had us focus on and bring attention to, and that was the involvement of the community and partnerships. So many of the proposals that we see coming through today not only have this community involvement within the guidelines or their timeline, but they've already had one, in some cases even more than one, community meeting already. And I'll give you an example of that in just a moment. I need my water. I took an allergy pill anticipating. And third is the partnerships. Rare now is the project proposal come through that's being unilaterally proposed by an entity. Partnerships are being formed early in the process. And this is something, of course, that we've just hammered in to folks through the years. The fourth is multiple benefits. Entities understand that we want the most from their project, whatever that project is. We're a unique program in that we fund a very variety of activities, from parks to open space creek restoration, green streets, infiltration systems, recreational trails, bike trails. We do a little bit of everything. So whatever the it is, we want to make sure that we're grabbing as many benefits as we can. And then the fifth is water conservation, which we've been touching on that. While this program has always had a bent and a bias towards long-term sustainability, water conservation, we had added leverage this year. We had the governor's executive orders, I think no less than 2 regarding the drought. We had the secretary's release of the Water Action Plan. And then we also had a statewide interoffice memo by Secretary Laird directing his departments how to manage urban greening projects with this drought. So we literally took that message to the streets, and we're just completely thrilled with the results. And if I had a favorite round 3 moment, I'm going to say that it was at a little school, Lenox School District. We had the superintendent of schools there, the principal, the chief of facilities. We had, Mr. Chairman, one of your staff, Seth, there. And everybody was scouring and scoping and looking at this sea of concrete to figure out how they could grab the most benefits. You know, we wanted to grab some water, we wanted to sequester some carbon, and we wanted to provide shade for at least 4 classrooms for these students who were currently baking during the hot temperatures. And I remember having a moment of just standing back and smiling and enjoying the partnerships, because we also had a senior engineer from LA County Public Works there. So it was just an incredible example of the partnerships that have been coming. And I think another testament, this is in addition to my 5, okay, another testament to the forward progress is this is the first year where we've included a substitution list. In the past, we've left money on the table. And I think that's a testament to how far folks have come. So all that to say that we're very proud of the recommendations that we're bringing forth to you today, and we know that you'll be proud to have your name associated with these. I'm going to highlight a few of the projects. We're going to start with Kellogg Park. This is proposed, it's number 1 for the over $75,000 projects. This is the Trust for Public Land in partnership with the City of Ventura and the adjacent community for a new park. This is on 2.5 acres. The project has high community involvement, and this is the example that I was telling you that where they've already had more than 1 community meeting. That community meeting resulted in the city agreeing to open up that vacant lot for use prior to converting it to a park. So the city, along with its partners, have done a temporary trail along the perimeter of the lot, and people are able to walk it. Kids are able to use it for pickup soccer games. The community demonstrated its support for this project by taking material, scraps of material that was donated by an adjacent landowner, and they spelled out in the cyclone fence, "Love," with a heart, "our park." So it's just really a great demonstration of the community involvement. The total cost of this project was $4.4 million, is estimated at $4.4 million, with urban greening dollars contributing $1 million, and the remaining is with federal and local dollars. The second one I wanted to highlight is Mansell Corridor. This is being proposed by the City and County of San Francisco. They partnered with the nonprofit groups Walk San Francisco and San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. This is a unique project, and they're proposing to remove 2 lanes of traffic through McLaren Park. McLaren Park is the second largest park in the area, second only to the Golden Gate Park. They're going to extend the bike path by 1 mile. Parallel to that, they'll have a linear park with walking areas. It's going to have vegetated bioswales with an infiltration system. And this project is estimated to divert nearly 2 acre feet of stormwater. So it's a good project. Another unique quality with this project is it's serving 2 diverse levels of society. We've got middle class here, middle income over here. You've got severely disadvantaged on the other side. Both border the park, and both are going to benefit from this park. This project is estimated at a little over $6 million, with $850,000 being proposed from urban greening funds. The balance is with state, federal, and local dollars. The last one I'll highlight is Anaheim Coves. I'm picking this one because this was from an urban greening plan that we had funded previously. And so that was really exciting to see a project come forth from the plan. This one is creating, again, a linear park. It'll have 2 formalized entrances on either side. This project is owned by the Orange County Flood Control District, Orange County Water District, and Southern California Edison. And I bring that to your attention simply to show why we require such due diligence for site control, and to show you that we don't shy away from complicated. This is going to be a fun project for somebody to manage. I threw in some quick honorable mentions. I kind of did that last minute. But the most innovative project we awarded to the East Bay Regional Parks. They're addressing climate change impacts by including, and I'm going to read it because we all know that I don't necessarily understand it, right? This is straight from the committee. By including rising sea levels into its project design through the construction of a living shoreline or an offshore reef. And what they're doing is oyster and bird nesting rocks. Very unique. They've done some real extensive studies on this, and our environmental scientists were quite thrilled with this prospect. I said, although there were several entities on the heels of this organization, the one with the most partnerships goes to the city of Whittier. They left no stone unturned. They had support from everybody, from the health community, the cyclists, the pedestrians, the community, Kaiser, everybody. Everybody was there. And then last is the most interesting. And there were lots of bids for this one. I said, since I was the one doing the presentation, we were going to pick the one that I was most fascinated with, which is Civic San Diego, the South Crest Trails Project. And this was once a Caltrans right-of-way, and it was property that was deeded over by Caltrans to the city, and the cities and the community have been piece by piece rebuilding this area. And now they're working on the park portion and the restoration portion there along Choyas Creek. We met with one of the neighbors, and she said that, and I quote, she wanted to see the park completed before she died. And so this award will help in that effort. We want to see that park completed also. The total estimate project costs for all 40 proposals come at about $62 million. Urban greening will make up about 39% of that, with the remaining 61%, it looks to be, and these are guesstimates, it looks to be 11% in federal dollars, 15% in other state dollars, and 35% with matching local funds, which we thought was not half bad there. For disadvantaged communities, for the targeted funds, those that are $75,000 and lower, those are all for disadvantaged communities. So those 9 projects would be all for disadvantaged. For the remaining, it's 83% went to disadvantaged communities, or 24 out of the 29 projects. This is something that was done for us in statute. SB 732 did a nice job of determining where the priorities would go in this regard. Geographic distribution for these projects, 10% for the Central Valley, and in a moment I'll give a shout out to the city of Visalia, 65% to Southern California, 25% to the Bay Coastal. This program was designed to have high density requirements, so the natural sway of the awards goes to the Bay Area and to Southern California. When you couple the high density in Southern California with the lack of greening and the amount of hardscape and the push to try and capture stormwater, then the percentages came out just about as expected. I did say I wanted to give a quick shout out to the city of Visalia. Fresno also got a couple of awards, but the city of Visalia, they're just working it. We can see the progress year to year. They've got a little nonprofit that they work with who guides them, and they're really making forward progress. And this year we were just really pleased with what we found when we got there. All but one proposal is being proposed on existing public lands. Again, that's a priority that was set in statute. The one that got through and was very competitive was the city of Bellflower. They've got a wonderful little project where they're converting from commercial space. It's completely 100% asphalt right now. It'll be turned into a passive park. Thanks to our water guy, they've got some great opportunities. They're going to capture some stormwater, catch it before it goes into the channel. So we're really excited about that. What's also unique about that one is the city already has the funds committed for the development of the park. That was exciting. So before I open it up to questions, I just want to thank again the council for trusting us with the management of this program. Our mantra is that we're building a healthier California, one project at a time, and we believe that these projects that we've recommended for funding today will help California achieve that goal. This concludes my presentation, and we recommend the council approve the recommendations as submitted. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Diana?
Before we go to the discussion, I would open it with a motion to approve the staff recommendations.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? John?
Just a couple of brief comments, and one is I was briefed on this entire package in a long meeting, and am very comfortable with it, and congratulate you. And I know you went to see everyone, so it's this is not a process that was done by paper. It really involved hands-on in doing it, and I wanted to just maybe, as the other comment, highlight a question I had in the briefing, which is you just said the percent by area. And traditionally in this group and a couple of others where I'm a member, there's a real concern for geographic equity in California. But the underlying thing here was density. So I became persuaded after a long discussion that this is an equitable distribution based on where the density is, and that, yes, there might not be a project in Modoc County, but there is not density in Modoc County. And that was the thing I had to really understand, is that if people wanted to shoot at it for a geographic distribution, it is an equitable one given the criteria. It's not an equitable one if you just looked at per capita where the population is, because there's not density in certain places that justify the effort that's set forth in the statute. And I just thought that was an important thing to mention. So I'm going to look forward to supporting the motion.
Thank you.
Other comments? Brian?
Thank you. I just want to ask a couple of questions about the development of the program. I think you mentioned in your presentation that you threw out the number 62 million, and I want to make sure I understood that. Was that the value of the projects after funding comes in, both by the vote here and supplemental funding from either federal or local or other resources?
That's what the entities have estimated the total cost of all the projects.
Okay, so you're getting a 3-to-1 leveraging effect based on the investment of these state funds. And I see the overall program over a few years is I think 90 million was the size of the program in 732. Is that
It's 63 million to award.
To award, okay. And do you put out either an annual or another publication that summarizes the entirety of the program?
Yes, there's an annual report to the legislature that's done each year, and we provide those
specifically on the
statistics.
urban greening program?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Other discussion, comments? I probably, first of all, I really want to echo your statement at the beginning. The folks who are volunteered and do, in fact, some of them volunteer from various agencies and departments to review these projects and put in, I see them taking them home in the evening to look through them and evaluate them and provide comments. Really greatly appreciated, and the work that you and your staff have done has just been excellent. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's been, I think I might have used this word in my briefing to Secretary Laird. I was hesitant to use it, but I think the word fun actually came out because we were just thrilled with what we found in going out to these communities, and a lot of them are forward thinking and were so receptive, and we did a lot of preaching. And so it was good. It was good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Do we need any public comment?
Well,
I don't know if
I didn't get any. Okay, we have one public comment. So I was using the old system.
So the Mansell corridor is actually
Let
right.
me ask you to just state your name and who you're representing, and then
Robin
dive
Scher.
in.
My name is Robin Scher, and I'm representing myself. I'm a neighbor of McLaren Park and of the Mansell corridor, and I am very grateful that you are going to do this. And I don't really know how to go about making sure that many of our mature trees that are along that corridor are maintained during this project. Reckin Park, which has been doing a tremendous job in San Francisco, has been taking down quite a few mature trees, and there are quite a few of them in McLaren Park. So I thank you very much for funding it. I think it would be fantastic. So it'll go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And I don't know how to address making sure that the trees that are along that area are maintained.
I think Polly may be able to help you with that, and if not, I have some thoughts.
Well, some of the neighbors visited us on that site visit. In fact, one of them followed me every step of the way. So I know that the community is heavily involved, and this is one where you can now go on their website, and I meant to mention that. It was very impressive. You can go on the city's website, and they have updates already available. So there is a public process. They'll be having some more community meetings, and so the community is absolutely encouraged to come and give their input. There's a nice process for that.
And I can add that in San Francisco, removal of mature trees is not a simple process, so that they will have to get that approved for each tree they want to remove.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the grants are approved. The greening grants are approved.
Thank you.
Yay. All right, the next is item 7, round 3, Prop 84 Sustainable Communities Planning Grants and Incentive Program Recommendations for Funding. And Allison, it's
Hi, thanks a lot. I think I'm kind of the intermission. So what I actually did want to do, this is a really important moment for the Strategic Growth Council because it's really the turning point. We are about to wrap up the last of our Prop 84 funds and look to the future. So I want to make sure that we do actually acknowledge not only both the urban greening staff at the Resources Agency and the Sustainable Communities Planning Grant staff at the Department of Conservation, but also the Natural Resources Agency itself for being the steward of the Prop 84 funds. Secretary Laird, we really appreciate everything that your budget, finance, admin staff do. I will not name them out by name because they know who they are, but they have done everything. Well, I mean, certainly not Pat Kemp, but well, certainly, they have been the stewards of this fund and actually have such commitment to the program that it's something that we really want to acknowledge at this point. The other thing that I want to do before I introduce David Thesell from the Department of Conservation to come up and give a bit of background is also thank the others who were involved in the development of this program and others, including those who worked with us on the guidelines, the stakeholders, the actual state agency staff, as well as SGC staff who've put in a lot of time. And I will have Natalie Garcia come in and provide some of the initial background. So that work is really appreciated. We don't do things, we leverage considerably. So this is really an example of how SGC staff really rely on and collaborate with other agencies to get this stuff done. With that, I just wanted to introduce David Thesell, and he'll give a little bit of intro on what's going on.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, Chairman Alex and members of the council. I am David Thesell from the Department of Conservation. Very pleased to be here today. I find as it's going to a vote, I get a sense of excitement. It's a pretty exciting time, so congratulations, Polly, and to your staff. Former PTA president, I don't care whether it's a public meeting in this forum or just anything where there's that approval. It's a pretty exciting thing. So we are excited today. I'm here to give just a little background and kind of update you on the Department of Conservation's role. As you know, we've been managing this process on your behalf for the past 4 years. And so I'm going to give some background and then turn it over to Natalie, and Allison will give you some more details on the recommendation itself. Currently, we have 95 agreements in place for rounds rounds 1 and 2, and are managing over $47 million in grants. As you know, this is the third and final round of funding, of which $16.2 million remain. So a little over a year ago, SGC staff and I were here before you laying out a plan of action for this next round of funding, and I'm pleased to say that we've accomplished our goal. You have before you a set of recommendations that Allison and Natalie will go into, but I'll just share with you how we got here. So last summer, we assisted SGC staff in taking public comment on the Round 3 guidelines. We assisted in holding 4 statewide listening workshops, which were held in Roanoke Park, Sacramento, Fresno, and Los Angeles. The comments received contributed to the ultimate guidelines approved by the council in November of last year. So these guidelines, in part, became the solicitation itself, which was released in December. And once released, we, along again with SGC staff, conducted 4 workshops to provide technical assistance, and we held workshops in Monterey, Fairfield, Merced, and Los Angeles, and they were very well attended with over 200 attendees either in person or through video conference. The results of the outreach were increased communication through additional phone calls to the Department of Conservation, greater understanding of the process and criterion, and ultimately, I believe, higher scores. During the 90-day application period, we provided technical assistance in literally scores of phone calls. So we received 88 eligible proposals requesting $42 million, of which 29 was for the main pool and $13 million was for environmental justice. We screened all applications for eligibility, and we managed the review process. And as we have for the other grant programs with our department, we utilize the Financial Assistance Application Submittal Tool, otherwise known as the FAST tool, which is administered by the State Water Resources Control Board, which allowed virtually a paperless application and review process. Again, very pleased with the result. It's been a great thing. We've used this at least 2 other times that I'm aware of. And incidentally, Secretary Rodriguez, my compliments to the team that administers that. They are very responsive and really focused on customer service, so my compliments. So last month, along with SGC staff, the department managed the scoring and helped to facilitate a consensus meeting that was comprised of staff representing your agencies. And I echo the sentiment expressed earlier about appreciation for the dedication. We know people were working on these things, the reviewers were working on these things over the weekend. We know that they really were dedicated. We appreciate the commitment to the process. They were engaged. They completed most of their work on time. And we certainly were dedicated to additional discussion that went forward. And just they really, it was clear they were committed to reaching consensus. So the result was a set of projects which were highly competitive, and the scores certainly reflect that. The panelists agreed that the individual scores reflected their evaluations and that there were many more projects worthy of funding. A situation we see a lot where there's more projects worthy of funding than there are funds available. So the information before you is a result of a fair, competent, and objective process that the Department of Conservation is proud to stand behind. We look forward to the next steps, with your approval, of course, of getting the focus, the awardees in contract so we can work on the next steps of getting them in contract and working on their work plans to benefit their communities. So I'm available for questions, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Allison and Natalie.
Good afternoon, Chair Alex and council members. My name is Natalie Garcia. I'm a staff member with the Strategic Growth Council. It's been my pleasure to work on this program. It's one of the first things that I think I kind of jumped into when I started here at the council, I believe in about July of last year. So I came from a background in foundation grant making, so this process has been a little bit different, but I think there's been a lot of carryover, and it's been really, really fun to work on, actually, to join Polly with the fun having. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrace a little bit of background, but not too much, because David covered most of that, and then pass it over to Allison to talk a little bit about specific recommendations. But I do want to share kind of an overview of what we received. So the purpose of the grant program, it was authorized by SB 732 Steinberg bill, and it established a program. And the Budget Act, actually of 2010 to 11, authorized $63 million in Sustainable Communities Planning Grants funding. For this round, we have about $6 million available $16 available for round 3, which is the final round of these grants. So the purpose of these grants were to fund GHG reductions consistent with the state's planning priorities, AB 32, and the environmental goals and policy report if adopted. And it supports a wide range of planning activities, general plans, specific plans, priority development plans, transit priority area plans, and also included high-speed rail. So the overall program objectives, there was 12 this year that applicants could choose from. In the past, they were required to address all 12 in their plans. We felt that in this future round, with the revisions and getting feedback, that it was more productive to have them focus on just a few. So they could select anywhere from 1 to 3 and really address how they were going to obtain these sustainability objectives. So the 3 focus areas that were developed for round 3 were innovative incentives for sustainable development implementation. So this kind of was almost a catch-all for all sustainability projects that would meet the 12 objectives. Focus area 2 was a little bit more focused on transit priority areas. So areas that MPOs had identified as being priorities for doing more mixed use and high dense transit-oriented projects. The focus area 3 was specifically focused on community planning for high-speed rail. This was sort of the more long-term visionary. The train might not be, operating in the next, 20 years, but what are we going to do in the meantime to make sure that our communities around station areas are prepared and thinking about how to integrate high-speed rail and make it cohesive and make sense for their region. There was no predetermined ratio for funding across these funding areas. I think you can, as you'll see how kind of the applications came in for these 3 different areas, they varied in terms of, we wanted to meet them where they were. So 1 was general, it caught a lot more applications. 3 was highly specific and very forward-thinking. So we wanted to have an opportunity for innovation and also provide an opportunity for all jurisdictions. So we received 88 applications that were qualified and met all the threshold criteria and were reviewed. We received 75 for the first category, which was the broadest. We received 11 for category 2 for transit priority areas, and we received 2 high-speed rail applications. So we look at how this fell by region. We received the most from the Southern California region around Los Angeles. San Joaquin Valley was second with 18 applications submitted, Bay Area 14, and so on, as you can see down the list. So who applied? As the lead applicant, the vast majority of our applicants did come from cities. We had 11 from counties, 6 from councils of governments, 5 from metropolitan planning organizations, 5 from RTPAs, and 1 from a joint power authority. A big part of our program that we, as OPR and SGC, just received a briefing on Cal Enviroscreen Green 2.0, and we were reminded that the council was the first entity outside of Cal EPA to use Cal Enviroscreen Green in a granting program. So as they're kind of refining their process and fielding feedback on the use of Enviroscreen Green, we kind of have as well in this grant program. So we've been using Cal Enviroscreen Green for our 25% environmental justice set aside. So as you can see reflected in the recommendations in your staff report, it's Appendix A, that there's a 25% threshold that we had set aside for environmental justice grants in disadvantaged communities. The recommendation is actually a little bit over that. It's 28%. But Allison will get a little bit more into the specifics later. A few things that were different about this category was that it waived the local match requirement. As many of you know, that resources are often strapped in disadvantaged communities, and local jurisdictions often don't have some of the matching funding to contribute. Environmental justice applicants are also able to submit one application as a lead applicant in the main funding pool. So jurisdictions didn't have to choose between one or the other. Do we submit an EJ application or do we submit a main pool application? They were able to do both. So in order to be eligible for the set-aside, the plan area must include all or part of an environmental justice community. Communities, we identify these as the top 10 statewide scores using Cal Enviroscreen Green version 1.1. This was the version that was at the zip code level. Now version 2.0 is at the census tract level, so that'll be incorporated should we have future grant programs. The proposals were asked to specifically target and directly benefit that EJC. So a city could apply theoretically for a general plan that where the whole city isn't an environmental justice community, but they were asked to specifically describe how they were going to be working on behalf of that particular community in their general plan area. And the proposals were required to select promote equity as one of its primary 3 objectives, so we could get some more information on how they were going to make sure that the environmental justice considerations of that community were incorporated into the application. So as David mentioned, the review process was through the FAST system. It's an electronic system where applicants submitted their applications. All applications were scored by a panel of 3 reviewers. We came together at the end of that process after we had scores and had a group consensus meeting where we looked at the scores, and then we also found that there was several applications, I believe about 20, where there was a point difference of 20 or more between the highest and lowest score given by a particular reviewer. We felt that additional consideration and time is needed to look at those scores and to discuss them among the group to make sure everyone had a good sense of where they landed and to make sure that we had consensus on any areas of maybe misunderstanding or contention. So we had that meeting, and then after that we had some revised scores, and then we also considered some policy considerations in the process. SGC did, and then the next step is recommendations before you. In the review process, these are the entities that have participated and had representatives scoring and reviewing applications: Transportation Agency, Housing and Community Development, Forestry and Fire, Fish and Wildlife, Water Resources, a diverse group, OPR, diverse group of readers and reviewers with a wide breadth of expertise that we felt provided a lot of good knowledge in reviewing these applications on their merits. And just also another thank you to them for all the time and effort. Not only did they do what they were asked, when we came back and said, we need you to come and bring your notes and talk a little bit more about these specific applications, not one peep of a hesitation to be willing to do that. So we really appreciated all the extra effort. So some of the policy considerations that I mentioned before was the environmental justice set-aside goal of 25%. We were also looking at regional distribution of grants as well. Grantee past performance was a policy consideration, and as you note in the staff report, there is a 1.164 reduction to all awards. The report you see reflects a 165. We just wanted to clarify that that is actually a 1646. So in case all of the numbers didn't, quite add up exactly, that's the exact figure where the grant recommendations have been made. Also, you'll notice in your staff report there we will be amending it. There's a small table that has, I think, 6.5 in recommendations, but the actual recommendation number is 6.2 as reflected in the table, and we'll amend that staff report. So with that, I will hand it over to Allison.
Thanks. As I mentioned before, and actually as you just saw, Natalie did a lot of the hard work in moving this forward, so I really appreciate being the one to present the pretty maps. So what you have here is a graphic representation of what we're recommending to the council today. In your packet in Appendix A is the list of awardees, or of recommended awardees. And what you will notice is that there's a fairly, again, Secretary Laird, as you notice in terms of density, that the reflection on who's being recommended reflects that density. Although we do have some really interesting smaller applicants, Holtville in Imperial County. We have a good representation from the coastal counties, actually Monterey, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara. And then actually looking at, and some good representation actually up north in Butte County as well, in Redding. What we wanted to do was, this is a little bit of a dense table, but we did want to make sure that there was an acknowledgement, as Natalie referenced, the geographic distribution, as well as a little bit wonky, the dollars per capita, both in current population estimates and future growth. This is the thing about planning, is that if we can't plan for the future growth, we don't understand how and how much we're investing, we're missing something in this discussion. So what you see here is the kind of the breakdown geographically and by dollar amount of the recommended awards by region, which is generally situated by MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization. The other thing that I would note is, again, with the Environmental Justice Awards, we also had similar structure in terms of equity in that sense. We really did want to encourage a wide variety of applicants, and I think we got that through our environmental justice applications and the outreach that we did. Again, this is the main pool. We're looking at, again, about $11.6 million of the total of the 16. The Environmental Justice Awards actually reflect 28% of the total awards, which is higher than what we had originally promised and set aside for our applicants. This was mentioned in the Urban Greening Grant Program, but also in the Planning Grant Program, we are asking Council to approve a substitution list should funds be available from either previous rounds or round 3 grants. This is no means a guarantee, but there's a list in your agenda that recognizes that. The one thing I do want to make sure that there's a little bit of, so this is the recommended council action to approve the 33 recommended awards and the project substitution list. The one little bit of clarity that I do want, and this is a horrible graphic. However, you have a visual in front of you in your packet. There is that discussion about the small percentage reduction. I wanted to go through that really quickly to make sure that there was a clear understanding of that. What we have is, because this is round 3 in the final round of funding, we got to application number 32 and had a balance left over and wanted to make sure that we used the remaining funds towards an additional eligible application. We looked at the next applicant on the list and decided, or the next qualified application, and decided to fund that. But in order to fund that even more completely, we also made the determination to take a small percentage off of all of the grants in order to be able to get to 33 applications. And we feel that it's a fairly minor reduction, and so the recommended awards for each of those grants is a slight reduction than the requested amounts for all of the grants across the board. I'm sorry? how much was the? It's 1.646% of every application. Yeah. So we are careful in our rounding errors. We've been caught by the council before who, we appreciate your attention to detail. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear beforehand and to those who are anxiously awaiting some sort of vote from the council so that they understood what that reduction meant. So with that, I am open to questions and comments.
Questions or comments from the council, or also open to a motion? Can do it the same way as last time.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion?
Sorry, let me get clarification who moved and who seconded. Move, second. Awesome, thank you.
It's a pattern.
I have some comments or questions. So this is our third of 3 years of grants, I think. And I guess my question to the council is, are we done now, or and sort of never revisit this again, or are there things that we could do and should do as in responsibility to the taxpayers to make sure that that this was a good program, that the dollars were well spent, that planning actually ended in some kind of physical activity other than moving paper around, and that from a cost standpoint that this was an effective way to reduce greenhouse gases. So I'm throwing this open to the council and in an effort to figure out if we have an ongoing role here, or we just say goodbye.
So let me respond to that. On rounds 1 and 2, the same question was raised by you and me and others. And in fact, Liz Grassi, one of the members of the staff of the SGC, has been working on follow-up to that rounds 1 and 2 grants for much of her staff time at the SGC. And she, in a couple of meetings previous, has presented some of the follow-up findings. And one of the, to determine how they've gone, what feedback they have, how we can improve grants going forward, and equally importantly, how we connect up the projects that were done to further actions connected to those projects and potentially other funding. So I would anticipate, assuming that the SGC itself gets further funding to go forward and has staff, that we would continue on with that into round 3 and promote the concept that that we don't just leave these grants sitting out there, that if there are ways to further the efforts and the concepts behind them, that we will do so.
I'd also encourage us to try to figure out the efficacy of these grants over time. I mean, reducing greenhouse gases is I'm sure it would be a challenge to figure out exactly what planning grants, the dollars of planning grants and the greenhouse gas reduction levels, but insofar as this is going to be an activity that's going to go on for a long time in California and globally, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of a sense as to the cost of reductions through planning versus the cost of reductions through other means.
I think that's right. So, and then Mr. Fisher, to your earlier comment in your updates, we were thinking about SGC staff have been thinking about how to leverage the fact that we've funded such innovative grants to do the work that from a policy standpoint we've been trying to get really done on the ground. From a nerdy economist standpoint, I definitely see the value in trying to figure that out, and to make sure that the council understands that value, that other locals who are actually trying to struggle whether or not to do these kind of planning efforts understand that the value of this. And I think what it does is it then adds to the importance of then funding implementation of these plans. I think that's the added cost. It's hard to judge the value of a plan, but if you can get it built, that's the next item. If you can get it built, then that's the value. So.
Sure, John.
Just one additional comment, because I think that Bob's question was about looking at the effectiveness of these 3 grant rounds and determining the efficacy and knowing whether it'll be lasting. But there was either a direct or implied question about whether we're ever going to do this again in some form. And I think obviously the answers to some of the questions you asked in the first part will inform that. But it seems to me that there are trending changes in government and finance so that there are monies available from cap and trade, there are monies available from mitigations in different ways. If there is another bond, it seems to me that it's trending less toward specific carve-outs and more toward goals and a plan, and that people need to be entrepreneurial, that they meet those goals and those plans rather than just having money carved out for them, and that hopefully looking at these grants, I would hope it would make the case for continuing these efforts in some form in these other funding sources as things evolve. But I think that's the question you were asking as well, and I think it really has to be done with an eye to some of those things changing and how things might be available going forward.
Encourage us on an annual basis to get report backs on the grants in totality, and how many of these grants are actually how many of the plans are actually being put into use. Yeah. And I think over time, we'll start to build up a knowledge base of what worked, what didn't, but that's going to be a multi-year activity.
I think that's right. And we'll definitely come back to the council with updates. It's exciting because the round 1 of the planning grants are starting to wrap up and complete their contracts. We're starting to see some results on the ground. We're starting to see the market pick up, which is a nice thing. And so the plans are actually getting implemented. And so there's an opportunity to report back, and we'll definitely do that. So.
Okay, so we have some public comment. First commenter is Virginia Johnson, followed by, I have two on one card, by William Meeker and Kevin Gardner. So, Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to simply thank the council and the staff for this opportunity, this funding opportunity. Our project, which is the Monterey Bay Community Power Project, is recommended for funding. We're very pleased and thankful to be recommended for funding. One of only 2 of the energy projects recommended, so we're also proud of that. And we look forward to bringing back a successful project to your council. So thank you very much.
Thank you. William Meeker, Kevin Gardner, followed by Lucas Ferris. Frederick, sorry.
Yes, my name is William Meeker. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Burlingame, and this is Kevin Gardner, our city's planning manager. We first want to take the opportunity to thank the council and its staff for consideration of our grant application for our general plan update. The city over the past decade has demonstrated a serious commitment to sustainability practices through adoption of several specific plan documents, being our North Burlingame-Rollins Road specific plan, which was our first attempt at transit-oriented development near the Millbrae Intermodal Station, our downtown specific plan, which encourages mixed use and high-density development in proximity to our Caltrain station downtown, through our climate action plan adopted in June of 2009, which we have made great headway in implementing the policy direction provided in that document. And additionally, we have adopted a complete streets policy for the entire community. We'd like to use this funding to take this disparate approach to planning in the community in these multiple documents and generate a general plan that includes the policy directive of these multiple documents and builds upon that in order to recognize the key sustainability issues that are addressing the city of Burlingame and more broadly the Bay Area in general, that being housing jobs balance, the need to provide more affordable housing, and also to create a comprehensive and cohesive planning document that can serve to guide the future of the community and that truly reflects the populace in the community today and its keen interest in sustainability. At this point, I'll let Kevin make a few more comments and we'll wrap up.
Another aspect of our application that we see important, and particularly in light of some of the comments we've just heard here, is we would like this project to be an example or even a a sort of model for a general plan update. We've been following the development of the guidelines with the OPR and particularly the mapping tools as well as the templates, and this is something we're really excited. We see it as something that would fit really well with the scope of our general plan update, but also anticipate it would for other communities. So we would hope that this can be an example for other communities. Furthermore, part of our work plan is to include a implementation into the zoning ordinance of development standards that support the policies. So really the sustainable policies go all the way down into the development review level. It's something that can really be implemented. So just to conclude, as a local government, we really appreciate this opportunity. It's something we're excited about, and we're here for any questions, but at the very least wanted to express our appreciation for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll take some of what you do and put it on our general plan website, and that'll at least answer part of Bob's question. Okay, Lucas, followed by Nancy Werfel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the Strategic Growth Council. My name is Lucas Frericks, and I'm a member of the Davis City Council. I'm here to speak in support of the awarding of a Sustainable Communities Planning grant to the City of Davis for our Downtown University Gateway District Plan. We have sought to collaborate with local partners, including Yolo County as a co-applicant in this project, as well as through our active partnership with UC Davis. And we are also proud to have the support of our local metropolitan planning organization, SACOG. There's no question that infill projects can often be difficult to construct, and this one is no exception, although we are all well aware of the types of community benefits that exist when infill is done right. We've been seeking a variety of tools to assist us in this process, and we greatly appreciate the support from the Strategic Growth Council. Thank you on behalf of the citizens and the staff of the City of Davis, and I respectfully request your aye vote on this important item. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Nancy Werfel.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Werfel. I want to thank Mr. Fisher for his question about what's going to be happening next, and certainly Mr. Layard's discussion of that issue. That's why I wanted to ask a question of you before you leave this topic. I would like to know if I understand correctly that all grants through the Strategic Growth Council are going to end because the funding is ending? Question mark. I'd like to know if grants will begin again, and if so, under what circumstances? Question mark. What will be the process whereby the goals for future grants will be determined? Is that the purview of this body, the legislature, the governor? I'm just not 100% clear on how we get to where we're going. And fourth, I would like to thank you very much for the concept of evaluating what you've done. There's no sense in going forward in the future if we make the same mistakes over and over again, or if we do not appreciate all the wisdom that you've gained because you don't know you've gained it. Let's get going with learning from what we've done. I think this is a valuable process. I'm simply a member of the public that's interested in my government, and I came here from San Francisco today to let you know I'm concerned and interested in what we are all doing because we work together. So I just want to let you know I'm here, I'm watching, and I'd like to contribute, and the more you hear from me, I think the better off we all are. I don't mean me, Nancy, I mean the public. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Let me try and respond to your specific questions. The funding to this point has been through Prop 84 funds. That money allocated for the Strategic Growth Council grants will be finished with this round of grants. There may be further grants. We hope and expect so, depending on whether the legislature approves the proposals that we discussed earlier for cap and trade dollars. If that is the case, the legislature can provide specific guidance for how those grants or could be loan funds, for example, would be distributed. In addition, they could also provide direction for the council and its staff to provide guidelines for future granting, or maybe a combination of that. There may be other sources of funding ultimately. I expect sometime in the state there may be future propositions for things like what the Strategic Growth Council does, and we are conceivably an entity that would receive that funds, but at the moment that's unclear. And beyond that, I think the council does agree, first of all, that we benefit from hearing from you, and second, that we hope to capture the knowledge, both positive and otherwise, from the efforts that we've taken so far. That seems like a much better way to do things. So thank you for that. Okay, other questions, comments, discussion? All right, there's a motion to accept the staff recommendation on the round 3 grants. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, it is approved. We spent some millions of dollars, so thank you very much to all those involved. Okay, so...
Applause for that. I'm just, can I?
Yes, you may.
Sorry. We were applauding a lot today, it seems, so let's just end that one.
Great. Let's move to agenda item 8, which is infill finance report by Economic and Planning Systems, EPS, initial findings and next steps. Allison.
Great. Thanks. So this is more of intended to be an informational item and for some potential discussion from the council. As you may recall, in February of last year, the SGC approved a staff recommendation to look at barriers to infill development, and specifically infill financing. What had been done by Mr. Fisher and his staff was to really look at some of the major challenges to funding infill development and what that could mean for the state. What we did, the SGC staff actually engaged Economic and Planning Systems to develop a report and study, and they're going to walk us through the process and some of their recommendations. They actually came up, the direction to them was to explore existing options, identify where there are challenges to making this really work, and to not be very shy about it, honestly, because ultimately what we want to do is get these projects built. We need to recognize the challenges. This is not necessarily a challenge to the council itself to determine, but I think what it is it's food for thought in terms of if the goal is to build infill to support local communities in doing this, what are the real hurdles that the locals face ultimately, and can the state provide support to do so? So the other thing that I think that we've talked about a lot actually today is looking at infill and trying to figure out what role the SGC or the state might play in focusing on infill development. And I think there are a number of opportunities that are coming up in the next year from the transportation, housing, cap and trade discussions, all sorts of, and the resources actually ag preservation in addition, that I think will lend itself well to this conversation. So that was a really good lead-in to the conversation, the presentation that EPS has today. A couple things I want to acknowledge. One, Lynn Warren from CalHFA, who's really served as the day-to-day, or most of the day, sometimes the day, project manager in the absence of SGC staff who've taken on, he's really taken on this project, and his expertise has helped as well. Tom Lockard, who may or may not be in the audience. Tom Lockard is actually practices in terms of public finance, and in his past role, has a role in underwriting and serving as a public finance expert, but served as kind of an informal advisor, as well as several other private developers and public finance experts. So I would like to introduce Walter Kieser and Ben Sigmund from EPS to basically lead us through their presentation. So it's just an arrow.
Thank you very much, Allison. Again, my name is Walter Kieser. I'm a senior principal with the firm Economic and Planning Systems. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I'm here with my colleague Ben Sigmund, who's been the primary colleague in conducting this study. Before I get started on my formal remarks, though, I can't help but make a remark about what was just said. As somebody that works at the ground level and have for my entire career, I've seen over this past few years both the planning grants that you've offered and also those that have come through the MPOs as being a very, very important part of development readiness in infill areas. I did an assessment for ABAG last year, the Association of Bay Area Governments, in which I looked at the so-called PDAs, the priority development areas, from the standpoint of the development readiness. And one of the key factors when we sorted things out that led to development readiness was quality plans and local regulations. And these are the things you're investing in. There's a lot of other aspects to this, but that's something that's very, very important. So on behalf of all those recipients that have done those plans and your own mission, I think it's been a great program, and I think doing some kind of analysis such as you suggest will be really good, and we'll have more to say about that as we go forward. So the reason why are we doing this study? The SGC is charged with implementing SB 375, and one key aspect of that, of course, is looking at this topic of reducing greenhouse gases through changes to California's land use patterns. And this study is directed at, well, what are the constraints and issues around that? How might additional funding help along those paths, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that's important that we look at in our work at the local level is recognizing that while achieving those greenhouse gas reductions, that is related to AB 8 and SB 375, there are a host of other benefits from this that planners have pursued for many, many years. And so it's a broader agenda, as the state's planning priorities have pointed out, and beyond. One thing that we want to point out, however, is that in our work and looking at these infill areas, and this has always been true, and it's certainly true as we sit here today, that there are lots of challenges related to infill development. And one of the things that we wanted to do as a part of this study is to describe that in a straightforward way that might allow us to focus on or to create metrics in that about the differences between areas, the degree of constraint, and how various interventions at the state, regional, or local level may be able to help. So one thing we wanted to do, of course, is talk about, well, what are these infill sites? What are these areas? And generally speaking, we're talking about them as being areas that are located within the existing urban fabric that have potential for redevelopment or infill development. It's important to know that over this past number of years, as a result of SB 375 and the so-called sustainable community strategies that the MPOs such as ABAG and SCAG have identified these focus areas or planned priority development areas as a part, and these represent examples of these infill site opportunities. One thing about the context of this infill, is important to know that for many years, through the redevelopment process and through plans and programs, downtown planning has been going on for these areas. And it's always been a difficult case for revitalizing, especially over the past generation of development happening on the periphery of towns and the weakening of the cores of cities. Of course, I think that has turned around now from a market perspective and other things, but it's definitely the case that there are major challenges that are faced. Another thing that we recognize in our work, whether we're looking at it at a regional level or a statewide level, is a considerable disparities between areas. When we look at infill areas on the peninsula, where we do a lot of work, or in San Francisco, where you have very, very strong market conditions, while there may be constraints, the economic conditions are such that these constraints can at least be managed effectively with existing resources. And then there are cases where, because of less market strength and perhaps greater constraints, you have serious problems to contend with. There's also the topic of intergovernmental conflicts, policy misalignments, inadequate local government resources. One of the issues that we hear of when we're at the city councils about infill is, oh, that density costs more money than it generates. So there's an underlying fiscal weakness here in California that causes a disincentive for people to be friendly and accepting of some of this development, particularly in some of the outlying suburban areas. So it's just another piece of the puzzle that we can't ignore. This isn't all just about specific funding for infill, but looking at kind of the broader context local government financing here in California. When we look closer at infill sites, we look at a whole host of constraints that we want to keep track of. And some of this is important not only from the standpoint of understanding what the needs are, but also understanding how to intervene. When we looked at the sites for ABAG and MTC, we sorted the PDAs into areas of places where funding basically is not necessary because they're financially strong, areas that basically have such strong weaknesses or such weaknesses in their market constraints that you could spend all the money in the world and not achieve anything. And then, of course, there's the middle, a kind of a triage logic. And that's a kind of a model to think about these constraints, because when you apply that, it helps you figure out, well, exactly how do you intervene, what's the proper way to do that. So market demand is a critical factor. Another thing, of course, is when we look at these infill sites, they're almost exclusively parcelized, have existing development on them. The hurdle or burden of overcoming that is considerable, particularly when local governments do not have site assembly powers like they once had. Higher construction costs. The type of development that we're looking at in these infill sites on a per square foot basis tends to cost more. It's higher density, multi-story, often with structured parking, very, very high cost of development, creating an additional market hurdle. Very commonly, these infill areas lack adequate so-called backbone infrastructure. The infrastructure that's in the ground is inadequate. It was built 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Oftentimes, major constraints in transportation, flooding, and other kinds of things exist. Clearly, in some of the areas, we have policy constraints and regulatory hurdles of one sort or another. It might be a hazardous waste site, or it may be the fact that a particular jurisdiction has height limits, policy constraints that exist that the local voters have supported, reflecting community opposition to higher density development, something that has to be faced. Now, as time goes on and people become more accustomed to this sort of development, we think some of that will diminish, but certainly it's a hurdle we faced in our work. Regional infrastructure, one of the issues that comes up a lot is the connection of these areas to the regional infrastructure, transit in particular, highways, and then again, as I already mentioned, a lot of contaminated sites. Many of these infill areas have had a historic development pattern that has yielded contamination. There's wonderful sites, at least location-wise, that are burdened with costs that far exceed their economic value, and they will remain holes in the ground without public intervention beyond that can be generated by the market forces alone. One of the things that we did as our study to just begin to understand and measure and articulate some of these constraints is we conducted a series of case studies. We wanted to do this to develop so-called metrics or measures. And by the way, this is something that might be done in the future in terms of the growth councils looking at areas, trying to figure out, well, how do you measure this? How weak is it? How strong is it? Where is the intervention necessary? We did this as a kind of experiment or a method to allow us to look into that question. We also wanted to pick areas that we picked these case studies with the assistance of your staff to reflect areas that were neither on one or the other end of the spectrum. We wanted to learn something, so we picked areas that we knew had some issues that we would want to explore and that our measurements would have something to chew on, so to speak. Basically, the ones we included was a site in downtown Concord, the River District here in Sacramento, Fresno downtown, and Southgate. We also chose these areas because in each case the EPS, the firm, has had something to do with planning or financing for these areas. So we had some background knowledge of them that would help us do our work. Here's just a map of where these are located. We wanted some geographic diversity in our case studies, and that's what we have. Basically, these metrics, as we intended, showed that each of these areas have some unique problems from the standpoint of financing, that in each case market values that are existing today are a little behind what's necessary to achieve the plans and programs that have been in place, and that in some cases, even with those plans and programs in place, there's inadequate financing from existing sources, development-based sources primarily, because development-based sources is what local governments have historically depended upon in this last generation to fund infrastructure and new development. Another findings have to do with the fact that the so-called these infrastructure costs themselves are a constraint, and that another problem, of course, is the timing of development. While funding is needed now, the development of this program might take place over 20 years or 30 years or longer, creating a gap, a significant funding gap. And of course, when we looked at this question of TIF, and we did it for obvious reasons, we found that there's substantial differences in the tax increment financing potential related to that odd creature known as AB8, which basically allocates property taxes to jurisdictions in a way that arguably is not entirely understandable or fair from the standpoint of winners and losers. This wonderful thing is called a spider graph. And these show just the results of our study. And basically what you have are patterns that visualize the kind of problems. Is the problem infrastructure? Is it feasibility? Is it market depth, TIF capacity, or special tax capacity? And you'll see there's quite a bit of difference between these areas. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail about this afternoon, but just to point out that we did do this and that we find this information is useful, will be and is useful in informing was useful in us informing our recommendations, and also may be useful going forward in terms of figuring out what the best prescription in these different areas may be to solve these financing problems. Yes. 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 Yes, they are pretty similar. Basically, those are all, the ones that are similar, Sacramento, Southgate, and Fresno, all have issues with development feasibility, basically, and also issues with tax capacity for one reason or another. Concord is strong because it has a strong, it has a substantial AB8 factor, and also it has, because of the nature of development, a reasonable special tax capacity, and doesn't need a lot of infrastructure investment. So these are just ways of looking at things. We could have had a hexagram or a larger gram if we wanted to reflect all the constraints, but this just gives you some idea of how these things can be, in fact, measured. So I will now go into our recommendations. One thing that I wanted to point out before I do is that in looking at this, coming into this project, we realized that the problem is, while there are certainly financial needs, options, and recommendations that we can be made and that the state can pursue to help all this from happening, we also place that in a broader context, basically a programmatic context that we will follow the recommendations on. Just creating dollars, and this comes back to what was said earlier this afternoon, just sending money off isn't what needs to happen. There has to be some follow-up, there has to be some programmatic context, and most importantly, there has to be coherence. That is to say, you can't be doing one thing and then mitigating it with something else. You want to make sure that all the programs and policies at the state, regional, local level are somehow or largely aligned towards the same goal and not in hard opposition to each other. And that's a big statement, but something that's very, very important to point out as we get into the recommendations here. Basically, our recommendations fall into four categories: modifications to existing legislations and programs, new state bond programs, new funding sources, and an enhanced role for the state to provide catalyst or lending programs into these infill areas. So there's four categories. Basically, everything that we're talking about will be familiar to you. Many of these things are either parts of existing legislation, or have been done previously, or have been talked about. So there's nothing particularly new under the sun, and that's generally almost always the case. With respect to the modifications, and you talked about this earlier today, certainly the cap and trade offers a source of funding that can fund one or another of these programs that we'll be speaking about. The proposal, as Senator Steinberg laid out, would be consistent with or moving in the direction that we think would be prudent. There's lots of different ways of configuring this, but certainly using some of that money in an efficient way towards helping with infill development seems to make a lot of sense, presuming that you can conclude that you are getting those GHG reductions that we would all hope for. Another modification has to do with this so-called tax increment financing in the wake of the loss of redevelopment, replacing it with something. There's currently obviously legislation and been talked about a lot in this last year. We've participated in that in a variety of venues ourselves, and we think that there's merit to reintroducing that in some form, and we'll talk about that in some detail. And then this lending program that I spoke of, basically creating a situation where the state, using programs like the iBank, but taking a different profile, a profile where there is some risk involved, because in fact the need is where the risk is, candidly. So our first recommendation has to do with cap and trade, and we're basically saying that we think it's reasonable that for some of that money to go for infill housing, mixed-use development, site assembly in one form or another, either as grant programs, much like you were just speaking about earlier today, or planning grants, one thing or the other. Also, this notion of allocating these funds in a reasonable way. One of the things that we did recently was work on the OBAG, so-called OBAG program for MTC, looking at allocating those monies. And we used a system of allocation much like you did for your Prop 84 grants, and we think that that is a good way to go. It can cause a little grief here and there, but I think it's the efficient way to do things, and we certainly think that's the way to do it. Also, we think that this lending program that we're speaking about will need capital, and so some of that cap and trade perhaps could be allocated to that program, at least as a seed program, to see how it might function going forward. The second recommendation has to do with the IFD legislation. We know that there's a new bill that's being created that built upon what was previously in the trailer bill. And basically, we think that that is a perfectly good thing to move forward with. We have a few recommendations to augment that or perhaps make it more accessible and useful at the local level. One would be to eliminate the voter approval for the formation, not debt issuance, but the formation. Reducing or at least addressing some of the redevelopment related requirements. A lot of our clients are having pretty significant difficulty with that, and we think that reducing those requirements or addressing them in one fashion or another would make the bill much more useful at the local level. The third idea has to do with creating a state funded incentive. That means basically if a local agency decides to use some of its precious property tax funding for funding infrastructure, other infill needs, that the state might want to incentivize them to do that by providing a match funding, dollar for dollar or some ratio that would say if you do that, if you put that skin in, we'll match you at some level. And that creates an incentive for that to happen. Understand that it's a tough call for local jurisdictions to take property tax, which they use to fund local services, oftentimes, and especially going through this last recession, very, very difficult terms. A very tough call. And there will be political challenges, of course, to diverting basically general funds into infrastructure financing. So providing some matching funds into the mix may be a way of overcoming some of that political difficulty at the local level. Also, we think it would be helpful to clarify and broaden some of the financing things that can be financed, perhaps matching some of the language in the special district or special assessment acts that you have, just to make it simpler and more consistent with standard or more standard infrastructure financing bills. This revolving funding, basically, there's, as I mentioned earlier, and we certainly discovered in our case studies, there's a big problem oftentimes with development generally, but particularly with infill development of there being a mismatch between the need for the infrastructure investment and the cash flow that comes from the development. And sometimes that is 3 years, sometimes it's 10 years. It varies. We spend a lot of time studying this in our work. So this creates a gap, if you will, and that gap was broadened and widened through the recession and the changes in the credit markets, where banks were lending at equity ratios of 10 or 15% before the recession, and now those numbers are double that. And so there's a whole lot of reasons why we have financing problems that are basically gap financing problems. It's a market failure in economic terms. And so we think that a state revolving revolving loan program could really help solve this problem. Yes, there will be risks, more risks than so far the iBank has been willing to take. But we're saying, what are you here for? You're here to address market failures, not compete necessarily with commercial credit. So this allows, it seems to us, a way for, at fairly low risk, and certainly when you look at the benefits involved, an idea that would say, geez, you could actually serve or provide a lending capacity or a function that would help solve a very significant problem that a lot of areas have, even in some of the more market-strong areas that are facing infrastructure problems. These gaps can be tens of millions of dollars, and having some kind of credit enhancement, if you will, could substantially, in our view, assist and promote infill development. Bond funds, Prop 84, of course, was successful, as were 1A, 1B, 1C back in 2004, a bit overshadowed by the recession, unfortunately, but we think that another round of bonds like this in the coming years could serve to create capital in addition to the cap and trade and other funding. It's one-time funding, to be certain, but there's a lot of opportunities to catalyze and jumpstart some of this development around the state. We think bond programs for both affordable housing and infrastructure are in order. With infrastructure, we think the measure should be for infill and targeted at the transit and transportation infrastructure. One thing that we've learned in working in the Bay Area is the federal grants combined with even the half-cent sales tax measures through the countywide transportation plans, in many instances are not really addressing the full cost. Particularly with BART and BART improvements, stationary improvements, very, very expensive, and there's significant funding gaps that an infrastructure bond could help close and make things more realistic. Affordable housing, a huge, huge problem. The notion in the sort of sustainable community strategies is that some significant fraction of development in these infill areas will be affordable. That's a very good idea, but it's a very big price tag. Each one of those affordable units, on average, requires about a $200,000 subsidy, and funding that one way or the other is always a challenge, as many of you know. And so a bond that would create funding for some of that work, like Prop 1C, or perhaps an additional recurring source of funding, such as the current pending dock tax proposal, would be helpful in meeting these requirements at the local level. Candidly, many of the goals that ABAG has in Plan Bay Area or SCAG has for its sustainable community strategy are simply unrealistic without substantial additional funding from one source or another. This has to do with detailing. Number 6 has to do with detailing our notion about this state participation in the IFD, providing some kind of incentive for people participating. We think at a fairly low cost, focusing as it will on specific infill areas and being allocated on some competitive basis, I imagine, you could get a lot of, do a lot of good and incentivize local governments to proceed with IFDs and move some of that general money into infrastructure financing to pursue infill development. Basically, another big topic that we have in infill areas, in the last generation, basically infrastructure financing in the so-called greenfield areas was done largely through so-called Melrose community facilities bonds, not by elections, but by basically landowner approval. Two-thirds elections are difficult to pull off, but in greenfield areas, you have this opportunity to impose these taxes without an election because people don't live there yet. That same facility doesn't exist in infill areas. There's often people living there, creating a significant hurdle. So we think it's reasonable, and we know this is a tough pull, but we think it's reasonable to at least consider reducing that 2/3 in these infill areas to create an incentive for using these special tax vehicles on future businesses and residents to fund infrastructure. And limit these, as I said, to infill areas and limit them to specific infrastructure requirements. An investment tax credit program, one of the other things that we find in, as I mentioned in the constraints, is the topic of the added cost of infill development construction. And we think that a tax credit program, much as like you have for your low-income housing, but applicable to all infill development or area development in infill areas, would help offset that cost bias, that extra cost that exists in infill areas. It's a substantial number. Lynn's office has done some work on this topic, looking at these costs and studying them in some detail. We certainly are aware of it from our work. So we think that this would be a way of basically addressing the, sort of some of the private sector challenge of getting the numbers to work on some of these infill projects. Now, state motor fuel taxes. Now, this is a good one.
Yeah, probably not worth a huge amount of time.
Sorry. Clearly, we all know a little bit about state motor fuel taxes. We think it's not unreasonable, given all the other things moving around, that a motor fuel taxes be considered a small increase, 0.25 cents per gallon, as a way of funding specifically transit and transportation-related needs in these infill areas. It can generate a substantial amount of money without a whole lot of pain. And besides, we all know that those motor fuel taxes year by year are diminishing in their significance as they sit due to CAFE standards and also the effects of inflation. This chart here shows basically how these recommendations relate to some of the constraints that we envision for the in the infill areas, just to give a sense that we're trying to address each of the problems that we find with respect to infill constraints. Now, to finish quickly, I will say, as I said at the beginning, that all of these financing programs need to happen in some kind of programmatic context. And basically, we think that there's a role for the state, the Strategic Growth Council, and your agencies, the regional and local agencies, to achieve this. Basically, these aligning state and regional local programs, addressing regulatory complexity as you have or begun to do with reforms to CEQA, looking at these funding, providing funding, improving local government access to credit. All these things are things that the state, certainly we think the state can do along with their local and regional partners. The function of the state we've largely talked about in our recommendations, but we want to make a point that looking at these regulatory hurdles and policy conflicts is very, very important, and to make sure that you are not creating problems that then you have to solve with additional funding. At a regional level, and we've done a lot of work for the regional agencies, both the MPOs and CMAs on this, and they're doing a lot of work, and I think that there's things that they can do with respect to further focusing of those federal grants, concentrating their sales tax dollars, creating some kind of incentive for additional incentive for housing at the local level, providing technical support. As you know, a parallel planning grants are occurring through the MPOs, and looking at local and interregional solutions to some of these problems. And the local level, where the rubber meets the road, literally, we think it's very important to develop this topic of regulatory certainty and transparency, and this is where the planning grants come in. They've already gone a long way in that direction, and certainly more investment in the area can yield positive results. We think that making investments in the broader urban context, not just the immediate infill areas, but schools, open space and parks, trails and these sorts of things that improve the quality of life in urban areas generally will be really, really important. The idea of improving the readiness of sites through various techniques, parcel assembly, and these sorts of things will be very, very important. And of course, last but not least, at taking responsibility at the local level for creating affordable housing strategies. So, I am done with my presentation. Happy to entertain questions and comments.
Well, first, thanks for doing the report and providing the information. Obviously, we struggle with this set of issues around infill and how to promote it, and we've been working on this for quite a while without obviously a magic bullet. But let me open it up to council members and for any questions, comments. Where? No, I'm sorry, Anna.
Well, first let me say that I appreciate the information, the very thorough look at infill, which is, in my experience, is the hardest development to do by far. And one of the issues that comes up as we look at infill projects, particularly as they're related to transit-oriented development projects where you're going to try to build up along transit lines, is that the minute that you identify the transit line, all the property along that line starts to increase in value. And that's because it does have higher value, because they know that its potential for redevelopment is there. At least that's been part of my experience. And when you rezone it to a higher density, the value goes up. And particularly in rural communities, you see that happen right away. Is there a way to capture, to have early land acquisition or a land value capture that would give us the ability to not have to figure out 5 different ways to increase taxes? Yeah. I'm talking as a realist and as a practical application. Is you've got some real good solutions laid out there, but it requires a number of increases.
Yes, the answer is absolutely. I learned this lesson the hard way many, many years ago when I did an assessment district, and of course when you do an assessment district, you condemn a bunch of land, but we created a lot of value, and when we got to court, the property taxes were 3 times what we had started with because of the value of simply because of the value of the improvement, or the value that imparted on the land from the improvement that we made. So the answer to your question is there are strategies, and this is something coming back to your discussion earlier today, where there are strategies, some tried and true, some new, that can address this. Certainly land banking, land assembly, such as redevelopment agencies once did, is an important, very, very important thing to be able to do, and we would hope that one of the things that would come out of the IFD would be land assembly powers of some sort. There's issues around that, but certainly without land assembly powers, it's going to be tough, because at least then you can purchase and hold and achieve public purposes without and capture the value yourself. So that's very important power for local government in our view. We're also, this topic of value capture from a regulatory standpoint is something that's a kind of hot topic. We're presently working on a case in Redwood City where we're actually studying this topic and figuring out, well, how do you do exactly as you say? How through the regulatory process can you basically capture value that is created by the increased density in a way that is cognizant and of the market forces at play. So you're not basically creating something that basically deters the development that you would like. So this is an example where, as we develop these regulatory tools, and a number of people are pursuing this, Santa Monica as an example, where we've done some work recently as well, where some best practices could evolve here in the near future. It's an old topic, certainly in areas like San Francisco, where you have so-called transfer of development rights and such, is an example of that. Certainly through development agreements, we've done these things individually. So there's ways of doing it, but we would hope this work that's being done now, that we're doing in a number of our jurisdictions, would produce information that others could template upon. Again, this is a function that we see. It's a very important point that you bring up.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. You may have said this at the outset, and I apologize if I missed it, but is this study still underway, or have you concluded the study?
Well,
and is there is there a physical study to review?
Yes, yes. This presentation is occurring basically in advance of the publication of our report.
Thank you.
So yes, we've produced through the course of our work, we produced 3 working papers, and we are in the process of consolidating them into a study report, which will be a published document.
Okay. And then just another observation I have is that you list in slide 6 significant challenges with building infill and TOD, and I worked in my prior capacity on propositions 1B and 1C that had bond dollars available to incent infill and transit-oriented development. So I'm well familiar with these kinds of challenges, but I just wanted to ask you, and maybe the study itself goes into more detail. You list several infill challenges in slide 6, but I've just, a general observation is that many of your recommendations all revolve around funding. And I understand funding is a significant issue, and certainly targeted funding is, but things like inadequate market demand, site assembly constraints, inadequate existing backbone infrastructure, land use policy regulatory hurdles, community opposition,
yes,
which is a key
yes,
issue. Do you go into any more specific recommendations in the actual study on those issues?
We identify them and talk about some of them. Certainly this programmatic approach at the end that I went over briefly, yes, we do look at that. Clearly these are very sensitive topics. Some of these things, obviously, we have some direct control over. For example, regulatory hurdles, or at least we think we have direct control. Making sure that the Air Resources Board and DTSC and EPA and Housing and Community Development and the regional agencies are all talking to each other and not at cross purposes. That's easily said, more difficult to accomplish, as you're quite aware. So we think that it's, when we originally got involved with the study, that our view was, heck, let's at least point out and draw attention to some of these problems, because money by itself will not get the job done. There are these other things. Market forces are something that are harder to bend. That being said, that investment in infrastructure can oftentimes influence market forces. Transit, just as the topic was raised, when transit facilities come into play, and like we're hoping that would happen in Southgate down in Los Angeles, when that train station, as that transit line is there, those values the market will change. And part of what we want to do with our investments is invest in a way that influences and bends that market appropriately.
And do you know as well, when you look around cities like Sacramento, I was recently in downtown Los Angeles, and it appears that there's great growth in infill development. And I, for one, I hope that's true. But do you have a sense of that? I mean, in other words, while there are these challenges,
sure,
are we seeing growth in it, and what are the best practices to deliver it? And do you get into those things in the study?
Yes. Well, again, as I said, it's absolutely the case that it is happening. I mean, you don't have to. When I started in my professional career, if I had thought that San Francisco would be the top producing housing producer in the Bay Area at the end of my career, that would be amazing. But it's the truth. And there's not a stitch of vacant land, as we're all aware. So, yes, there's definitely a change. That change, though, is happening, or that infill is largely happening in places with very, very strong market wind at the back, so to speak. The Peninsula, San Francisco, Los Angeles. It's less so in more outlying areas like Sacramento, Fresno, and some of these other areas where people aspire to see some of this development. So yes, it is happening. Of course, we're enjoying a market uptick, thank goodness, after such a long, difficult spell. So it is definitely happening, and we think there are market forces in play that are favorable to this going forward from a demographic perspective, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't done a kind of large statewide forecast, but I can certainly say that from a market or urban economic standpoint, we believe that there's a lot of future in this development form.
Thank you.
Actually, let me just follow up on that. I think that from my perspective, what would be, assuming that we're going to get a report here at the Strategic Growth Council, the lead-in would be the activities that need to be taken internally,
Yes.
both at the state level, real specific,
Yes.
and at the local level, so that we can understand what the roadmaps are to get us to a place
Yes.
where maybe we can get support
Right.
for the kinds of revenue enhancement programs
Right.
that are going to be necessary. Because I think it's going to be really important that we get our house in order. And so, the more that you can drill down on the things that we can do internally, that'll be very helpful for us.
Yes.
And we really are working at, and the Strategic Growth Council, I think, is an example of us trying to work across agency
Right.
sectors to be able to achieve the kinds of new partnerships we're going to need to be able to make this happen.
Yes, and I will do the best we can. Obviously, we're budget limited, in fact, beyond limited at this point, but you're absolutely, again, from the very beginning, the point you're making was on my mind. There is absolutely no point in talking about funding unless you create a programmatic effort, and this is an example of that, to do that. There's also this notion of just doing a change. I mean, candidly, the state, regional, local relations have been strained. And it would be good to work on that. As I know a lot of you have a background in local government, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And when I'm working for MTC or ABAG, and I come to the local jurisdictions, and all they think about is RENA, and I'm thinking, well, geez, I'd like to turn this around. I'd like it to be more positive. And I think that we have a unique opportunity at this moment in history to make some changes there. Certainly the grant programs that you just went through is an example of creating some goodwill and some funding to begin to crack that. But absolutely, programmatic effort resulting from this study is really essential, and if additional work needs to be done in looking into it in more detail, so be it.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, I see Lynn Warren here and Tom Lockhart. You guys both, first of all, thank you very much for your work on this project. You both volunteered a lot of time and hard work. I wonder whether you have any comments based on what you've heard from both the council and from Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Alex, and members of the council. This is actually a pleasure to work on. It was I heard fun earlier from some of the other groups, and I had some fun with this. I also mediated a few internal fights, but that's a whole separate story. I think the point that Walt is making, and to Secretary Cabrillo's point, it's very important, is that I think there is a role for the state. As we look at credit markets, we think there are some failures. Outlying areas are not as wealthy as others, and I think the state has traditionally had a role in these areas to interject in either credit enhancements or subsidies, whatever the appropriate intervention might be, and we certainly experienced that with Prop 1C and other propositions before that. So I think there is the beginning of a roadmap for this, for the state's involvement with this, and I think we can jumpstart a number of starts. I also want to make a point that although this is not solely about funding, much of what we do today is about place-based development within communities. It has to be holistic, and it has to involve not only transportation, but health, as well as housing and education. So I think our lessons from the past, particularly from Prop 1C, is this place-based approach versus just build it, an infrastructure type development, I think is where we should head, and this is a good start for that. But thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, it was a lot of fun, so I'll leave that with that. I think Tom has some comments, and I did mediate some of Tom's comments, but I'll let him go ahead. But please, thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks. I'm Tom Lockhart. I was an investment banker for 30 years at Stone and Youngberg, and then I left a couple months ago, and I'm now with a startup, so things have changed. And so I can maybe be a little bit more independent about my observations here. And the importance, thinking about what I did as an investment banker, was really local government finance, and I was an expert in land secured finance, whether that's tax increment finance, special tax bonds, or back before Prop 218, 1915 Act assessment bonds. And so there's a good bit of conversation about assessments, but really we haven't seen any of those issued since 1996 because of Prop 218. So the ground has shifted here, and I see the ground shifting now with the end of redevelopment in the same way it did in 1978 with Prop 13. It took 4 years to figure out what we were going to do. AB 8 didn't just appear. It took some time to come up with a policy for dividing up the 1% county property tax rate. The notion that we need a two-thirds vote to get anything done locally, or the fact that we have a two-thirds vote on a special tax bond, which is a Mello-Roos bond, is really that carryover to that we need a supermajority to implement a tax. And as Walter pointed out, we use it. I've paved a lot of the state using it. We've used it in greenfields. We pioneered the use of this technique in San Francisco, where property values were high. We put a vertical Mello-Roos on the Rincon Hill Tower. If you ever come in off the Bay Bridge, you see that 62-story tower there. That has a Mello-Roos bond on it, and we used that to pay for local infrastructure improvement around it. So the technique's been used, but as Walter pointed out, it's very difficult to get two-thirds of any group to really agree. And so this notion in the state of a supermajority to approve any sort of revenue enhancement, whether it's property tax secured or special tax secured, is very difficult. And if you apply that same technique to infrastructure financing districts, you're not going to have it. It's not going to be used. So I think it's a myth to imagine that will actually create any value locally. So I think you've really got to grapple with the notion of lowering the threshold. It's a third rail in the state, but it's an important one to see actually a majority actually take control of local funding. And if you allow local governments to decide locally with a more reasonable vote, and I would argue that vote should be 50% plus one. I think the 55% is a carryover from the adjustment in school district financing that lowered the property tax threshold vote from 2/3 to 55%. That was a compromise. I think that there should be some leadership on actually allowing local governments to make these decisions to vote in property taxes or to create an infrastructure financing district, keeping in mind the redevelopment. If you look at San Jose, where I probably assisted in raising $1.5 billion for downtown improvements, that's a 7,500-acre project area, merged project area. What's being proposed for these infrastructure financing districts can be just one block. What that creates for the financial markets is a very unique risk. When you looked at investing in a tax increment financed bond in San Jose, you were getting the security of 7,500 acres. You were getting quite a bit of property securing that. It included all of the Rincon de los Esteros area, which is the northern part of San Jose where all the Silicon Valley activity is. So we used that and we put that into building downtown. If we're looking at creating infrastructure financing districts that are only a few blocks, you're really creating a situation where it's going to be impossible for the capital markets to come in. That may be a place where you step in with some credit enhancement, but if you're looking at postage stamps being created for infrastructure financing districts, you're really not going to be providing any support to what local government needs to stimulate economic development. So I'm a big proponent of lowering the threshold. I'm a big proponent for letting people take control of this locally by having someone show some leadership to bring it down to 50% plus one. I tackled the Jarvis-Gann people in 1996. I was the spokesperson against Prop 218, and the way every conversation started in any media event was, "Gee, Tom, why don't we want to vote on taxes?" We weren't going to go anywhere on that initiative, and so we were roundly defeated. But you haven't seen anyone use an assessment district since. So with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay.
Let me just ask one other
Bob.
question. That would be just of Allison and Mike in terms of what are staff. We're going to get the report, final draft of the report. What's your sense of where we go from here?
It's a very good question. I think what EPS and others today have talked about are some real challenges, and I think that Secretary Caballero, your point to what does that roadmap really look like if our goal is to build infill and to really curb sprawl in that sense. How do we actually finance this development? How do we support local governments in doing so? I actually think that there's a point at which staff can, to some degree, take the recommendations from EPS and also take input from others. We haven't really thought about, in terms of this particular effort, where we want to go. It appears that there's some interest from the council in pursuing that, and I think I'd like to come back with some staff recommendations on approach before we go too far down that. But we've been, Walter and I had some other informational meetings with the governor's office. There are others who are interested in the findings of the report. I feel like this could be a very useful beginning to discussions, even if SGC is not as directly involved. So I think the answer that I have for you, Bob, is to be continued, I think, for now. Yep.
Thanks. I would just make 2 points, Mr. Fisher, in responding to that question. And the first is that we asked for a very sober assessment of the potential for infill development, and I think that's what we got. A colleague of mine at the university once asked whether or not the efforts that the government was making towards infill were real or whether they were a civic magic ritual to make us feel better. And we certainly don't want the latter to be the answer to how we try and produce a better urban fabric. And so looking, I think, square in the face of what the limitations are is an important exercise. I think that one of the immediate things that comes out of this is the spider diagrams and the technique for assessing feasibility are techniques that certainly can be applied when we begin to look at cap and trade investment in urban areas. I think we're going to want to find projects that maybe just are one strand short of success and find ways to leverage our funding into those areas to make them whole and get good projects that are viable, that the markets maybe can't quite reach at this point. So I think there's immediately a useful product, but I think there's also a lot to mull over for long-term consideration.
I wonder whether the council members have any other input as staff starts to think about this, and to what degree we'd like to keep moving this forward, and how to engage the council in further dialogue.
Well, I have a suggestion. I mean, I obviously need to see the report before really being able to determine how we use it. But one suggestion is, I mean, there's currently activities going on. We're working at HCD, looking at statewide housing needs. Right. And it may be that we'll take some of that information and take a look at it to determine whether it fits some of the work that's going on there. OPR is looking at the general plan updates. And part of the challenge is that many times the state gets very prescriptive about what it determines local government should do, and that prescription doesn't work well with every community. But if there's a list of things that local governments can do that would help them to achieve their infill goals, then maybe as part of the general plan process, if in fact they have these limitations that will not help their infill projects, maybe that's part of what we start doing as part of our planning process. And I'm kind of talking off the top of my head off of a document I haven't seen yet, so it's hard to say. But I think that there may be some lessons learned we can take from that document and then start applying it to what we're doing. But I need to see the report before I can really make that kind of a commitment. And so maybe once we get the draft, we can start talking internally, share it with staff, and look at ways that we can be a little bit more forward-thinking in terms of looking at ways that we can incentivize. Part of what we have to do at the state level is trying to say, if you're going to do it this way, then there will be incentives. We don't know what they are yet, but start to craft them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you
All
for
right.
your attention.
I have one comment from Wendy Alston.
Chair and members, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
I'm Wendy Elton with California Walks. I want to compliment you for taking on the challenge of even looking at infill development and looking at what you can do. I think it is one of the things that is truly within your charge. And I just wanted to raise a couple points. One, in terms of community opposition, one of the things we are hearing around the state is if you will define infill to include all existing communities regardless of size, then you will eliminate a lot of the opposition, which comes from the smaller communities, a smaller portion of the state, but who have political representation feeling that they're being left out. And to assert, there is the, I live in the 50% of the denser part of the state. There is this metro versus rural, and so I think it's very important. There are many small communities throughout the state who can take their population share of density, and then they will get some infrastructure investment, etc. They face the same challenges on a different scale. And secondly, having gone through the whole Bay Area process, several things, and having lived in Berkeley for more than 20 years, which has been dealing with this all that time and working at the local committee, task force kind of level, there are a lot of policy ways to attack these various challenges. Structured parking costs, for instance. The state or local government should never subsidize those near transit. If you're going to do anything, you want to lower the requirement and not encourage people who want to own 3 cars to buy a condo next to the BART station. If they still want to own 3 cars, they should live somewhere else. We shouldn't subsidize that. And we should have policies that subsidize, because the people who are going to use transit the most are the people who own the fewest cars. There actually, is no argument about that. And, you can drive as much as you want without owning a car if you have a city car share. So there's all of these different policies that enable us to actually move towards sustainable communities. And I think it's not up to me to give you any policy directions or even suggestions, but your very purpose and everything you've been doing in terms of strategic growth and sustainable communities is what you ought to insist be in all of this. And that will give us ways to move forward. And I really want to suggest that that's a really appropriate place for all of your leadership. Every one of you I've heard here at different times has great ideas, and your agency has all of the facts and the research and the policy and know where to get the finance to make these things happen. And and the one final thing I wanted to say was that you really want to keep your whole notion of redressing the disparity between advantaged and disadvantaged communities clearly in mind as you do this, because otherwise what you're going to do is just reverse what we did in the 1950s and 60s, and you're going to have poor people all living 60 to 100 miles away from where they work, and we're going to have the same GHG, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so really having that state require people to take their fair share. And of course, I do have a personal bias on that, and it would just say that the whole RENA thing is really people who don't want to take their fair share. And if they don't want to take their fair share, it's fine. They can use their own local property resources to pay for everything, including transportation. And until we, it's kind of like, why should all of the most advantaged always get an unfair share? It's, we can't, all of the, anyway, $50,000 is our median income for the entire population of the state. I may be off a couple $1,000s, but Anyway, I'm sorry, I talked too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Okay, so with that, we'll give you the last word, and we're adjourned. Thank you.